Talk. And we are recording. Welcome everybody to this webinar on gender transformative interventions and violence against women with our featured presenter Ann Pederson, who we're very lucky to have with us today. I'm Robin Calda and I'm going to sort of moderate and facilitate today, but most of the talking will be done by other people. We're offering this webinar as a sort of partnership between Health Nexus via our HC Link program and Health Promotion Canada, so we'll have people on the line from both of those programs. And just as we start, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement, and I will do this for the Health Nexus office in Toronto, although our presenters are speaking from the West Coast, so please include the Indigenous people from the West Coast as well in your minds in this. The Health Nexus office in Toronto is located on the historical territory of the Wendat, Pechon, Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the lands and resources around the Great Lakes. Today, Toronto is the home of many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work in this territory. Okay, and I will switch to the next slide. So who you're going to hear on the webinar today, we're going to start off hearing from Angela Andrews and Barb Willett on behalf of Health Promotion Canada and Health Nexus. And then we will have Erd Ruman, who's the editor of the Health Promotion in Canada book that this webinar is a part of launching. And then we will turn it over to Ann Pederson. So to start off, I will turn it over to Angela Andrews. Don't forget to unmute yourself, Angela. It's #6 to do so.
Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Andrews. Can you hear me?
You're quite quiet, if you could speak up a little.
Okay. I'm Angela Andrews. I'm a health promoter with the Haliburton-Kawartha Pine Ridge District Health Unit. I'm chair of Health Promotion Ontario, and I'm also the acting chair of Health Promotion Canada. I'm happy to be here today in support of Ann Pederson and the 4th edition of the Health Promotion in Canada book. The book was officially launched in BC earlier this month, and an official launch also took place in Ontario at the Health Promotion Ontario Conference just last week in Toronto. Thank you to both Irv Rupen and Kate Froelich for facilitating both sessions. Health Promotion in Canada, in partnership with Health Nexus via HC Link, sponsoring a series of webinars to share some of the contents of this new edition to support capacity building, debate, and dialogue within the health promotion community. In follow-up to the Pan-Canadian core competencies that were created for health promoters, in 2016, the committee formed into the National Executive for Health Promotion Canada, which we've been terming HPC. So HPC was launched in celebration of the Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion's 30th anniversary at the 6th Global Forum on Health Promotion. HPC supports a collaborative of chapters across Canada. Health Promotion Ontario has been its own entity for about 30 years now, but it's now come under as Ontario's chapter, and with additional chapters under development in other areas across Canada. Our vision for health promotion in Canada is that by 2026, we will be a vibrant, connected, and effective collaborative working together to advance workforce development and action in health promotion, so that by 2046, all health promoters are equipped to foster health equity and for all in communities across Canada. HPC aims to be nationally and internationally recognized as the main source for supportive resources and to find a community of health promoters from every province and territory sharing tools, resources, and strategies for progressive health promotion practice. HPC's vision is to connect health promoters from every province and territory in Canada, sharing the tools, resources, and practices for health promotion effectively, ethically, and comprehensively. And it aims to be recognized in Canada as the go-to national association to enhance the capacity of Canadian health promoters that ultimately will promote health and health equity among communities, empowering people to achieve their full life potential. So to become a member of HPC, you could find more information on our website at www.healthpromotioncanada.ca. I will now turn it over to Barb.
And Barb, you just need to do #6 to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Angela. Health Nexus, as most of you are probably aware, has been a strong champion of health promotion since its inception over 30 years ago. And we work to support the development of healthy, equitable, and thriving communities. We do this by contributing to change, whether it be locally, regionally, provincially, and sometimes beyond that. We provide a range of services in both English and French, such as consultations, knowledge mobilization, and learning events to build capacity, mobilize leadership, facilitate community engagement and effective partnerships, and influence healthy public policy. And we bring a strong health promotion lens to all aspects of our work. So it really is with great pleasure that we're co-hosting through our work with HC Link, which is a collaborative of the Ontario Healthy Communities Coalition and Parent Action on Drugs. So we're co-hosting today with Health Promotion Canada this webinar and supporting the launch of the 4th edition of Health Promotion Canada, which is a key resource for the sector. So we are very excited to be here this afternoon.
Thanks, Barb. And I will, with that, that's an excellent segue. We will turn it over to Irv for his remarks. Irv, you're going to have to unmute yourself by doing #6.
Hi, everyone. This is Irv Rootman on the West Coast. We're still enjoying a morning here. This webinar is based on a chapter in the newly released 4th edition of Health Promotion in Canada, for which I was an editor, and presented by Ann Pederson, the author of that chapter and an editor of the book as well. She also has contributed to numerous other books, most recently Women's Health, Intersections of Policy, Research, and Practice, published by Women's Press, and Making It Better, Gender-transformative Health Promotion, published by the Canadian Scholars Press. And last but not least, Anne is a member of the board of the Canadian Public Health Association and an active member of the International Union for Health Promotion and Education. So with that, I'll turn it over to Anne.
Anne, you're going to have to unmute with #6 as well.
Everyone. Irv, in particular, thank you for that introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound good.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, everyone. As Irv said, we are speaking to you today from the West Coast, so I'd like to acknowledge that we are based on the unceded territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam bands here in Vancouver, and that we appreciate the opportunity to reside here and to do our work in the space that they so carefully monitor on our behalf. I changed the title very slightly for this presentation as I reworked it over the weekend, and so I'm making an emphasis, and I wanted to be clear about that, about using gender-transformative promotion in the context of prevention of gender-based violence. I should remind everyone, although it should seem obvious given what Irv and I just said, but I do receive royalties from the sale of the book that we've just released, and here's a copy of the very beautiful cover, and so I am in a modest conflict of interest as I give these remarks. Perhaps more significantly, I want to acknowledge all the organizations and individuals who supported this work, but also make today possible. So that includes, of course, Health Promotion Canada and Health Nexus and our wonderful colleagues and old friends there. As you know, I work at BC Women's Hospital and Health Centre, but the work that I'm talking about started when I was a staff person at what was then the BC Centre of Excellence for Women's Health, which is now dropped the BC from its name, is known as the Centre of Excellence for Women's Health. The work was funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research through a team grant to promoting health in women, which I'll talk about a little bit later. I, of course, really want to thank and acknowledge the support and compassion of my co-editors, Irv, Kate Froelich, and Sophie Duperret, who were very patient with me as I tackled this particular book chapter, which I'll say a bit more about in a minute. And of course, our publisher, Canadian Scholars Press. I mentioned that there was a team of researchers that were involved in the gender transformative work, and this is a list of them all. It's obviously a massive group of people. a research team largely based out of here, but not entirely, an advisory committee that included colleagues from Australia, and then a series of project staff that the CIHR funds were able to fund over time. The staff were not all employed at the same time, but over the duration of the grant, which was actually 6 years. So thanks to everyone for the work. This is what I hope to cover in the time we have available. I want to introduce what I'm meaning when I talk about sex and gender, and talk about the origins of the approach that we've developed together. Illustrate that with some examples of common health promotion practices, and challenge that with a continuum of action on gender and health. Then I want to switch to talking about gender-based violence in particular, and show you some examples of gender-transformative health promotion in that context, and hopefully we'll have time for some questions and dialogue. So this work begins from the understanding that I like this cartoon, this New Yorker cartoon, because it reminds us that we have been using, particularly in the health field, the concept that sex and gender are importantly distinct. Although these concepts overlap and engage with each other, it's very important to recognize that we are talking about two different things. So when we talk about sex, I'm primarily talking about biological processes and the structures that are associated with and differentiated by sex. Whereas when I talk about gender, I'm talking about a system of roles, social relations, and identities that we ascribe to people on the basis of their sex. Neither of these are truly binary concepts, so we don't just have male-female or masculine and feminine, but rather both rise on a continuum. Very hard for researchers to navigate that notion of continuum, but theorists are helping us to make sense of that. And so our methods have not caught quite up with our theory. So today I'm going to talk primarily about gender, and I will hopefully try to avoid referring to it only as a binary, but I'm acknowledging that that's somewhat challenging, particularly when you see some of the examples that I'm going to illustrate. I have one other caveat that I want to make because I think it's important within the context of this particular presentation. There's been use, particularly in my own organization, about the phrase gender neutral, and people are using it to refer to what I prefer to call gender inclusive. So if we look at this illustration of the three figures, I'm talking about gender neutral being when gender is absent, rather than when we are actually acknowledging and illustrating gender inclusiveness. So ironically, we have a brand new hospital that opened 3 weeks ago here at the campus where I work, and they put up signs for their gender neutral bathrooms, and surprise, surprise, they chose the figure on the extreme right as the image of the gender-neutral identity and expression. So I would challenge that as not being very gender-inclusive. So I want to talk about how this work began, and it started with what I call our burning question, which was, how do we improve health promotion for women? I came to the Center of Excellence for Women's Health, having worked in health promotion for many, many years, and our emphasis there at the center was on health, women's health more broadly. So when the opportunity came to talk about health promotion for women, it began with a very interesting and reflection on how has the field of health promotion actually considered women. And there is a literature that goes back 40 years that talks about how women have been represented and depicted in health promotion. For example, women are often both the explicit but sometimes the implicit target of health promotion interventions, especially social marketing campaigns, which are based upon certain assumptions about women's gendered social responsibilities. And I guess I better make a caveat here. I'm not talking about global health promotion. I'm talking about health promotion in the West, particularly but not exclusively in Canada. So the images and examples that I'm using are really based on a kind of Western notion of the kind of health promotion that the Ottawa Charter talked about and that sort of things. Over our analysis of the history of health promotion, we were pretty clear that despite some interesting opportunities, gender had not been well integrated into health promotion, and it was not really acknowledged as a fundamental determinant, even though others have made it clear that gender is an important determinant of health. As we all know, and it's been a standard critique of health promotion, that it continues to often take a very individualistic approach, and this was very significant when it comes to women because it failed to see the social structures that create and sustain the nature of women's lives, and accordingly it didn't identify or address the gendered factors that affect women's health and women's power or lack thereof. This resulted in some of the kinds of social marketing campaigns that are depicted here. You can see that they use certain kinds of imagery, they use certain kinds of social assumptions. The one in the center is a very old and very famous campaign about trying to prevent smoking by demonstrating the effects of smoking, the ravages of smoking, I would say, and being sarcastic about smoking being very glamorous. The campaign on the left is from the state of Virginia, and it's I find, very disturbing campaign, which talks about, it's an anti-obesity campaign for children, and it uses this image of a young girl and makes the comment that it's hard to be a little girl if you're not. And lastly, the one on the right is meant to be part of an FASD, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder prevention campaign, and it uses the image of a woman, but notice that she has no head, so she's rather objectified and treated as not having a mind. In case you think that these are the exceptions, look at some other examples. The World No Tobacco Day was just a couple of years ago. Notice the disembodied pregnancy with the zero alcohol. Some of you may remember the Think Again campaign. It's not that long ago. It was actually a participation campaign here in Canada, which was meant to be about families and parents and sport. But unfortunately, in order to get people's attention, they did things like throw soccer balls at women's heads, and in order to remind them to think again about whether their kids were getting enough exercise. And here's an example, a very recent example from last year about weight stigma. This is from a blog called The Conversation, and it is an attempt to challenge the weight stigma, the portrayal of obesity intervention campaigns by acknowledging the way in weight is stigmatized. And I must make a shout out here for a very exciting initiative that happened here in my own health authority, where they have done some fascinating work on reducing weight stigma and weight bias within the health sector, because it's a problem when it comes to helping people address their health and weight issues. Anyway, what's powerful about this is that this is very timely, but also that, again, notice that the image of this case, probably a man, there's a beard, he too is headless and rendered only as an objectified physical space. What's glorious about the picture on the left is that the two women are happy and doing something pleasurable together, and they look like whole people with accurate, hopefully a happy moment. The article that I read that's on the website and you can link to says, at the conclusion, only by accurately reflecting the realities of obesity, which is a chronic disease caused by both controllable and uncontrollable factors, can we move towards establishing effective solutions. Given that a UK-based research study from 2015 found that adults of all ages and backgrounds have stigmatizing attitudes towards those with excess weight, this is clearly something that needs to be tackled sooner rather than later. And I would just add that with regard to gender, there are gender norms and differences about whether women or men are overweight and obese, and the assumptions and stereotypes that are made. But given that this study documents that many people, share stigmatizing attitudes, it's not surprising that those of us working in the health field do too. But here are examples of resistance. This is a wonderful counter ad from the same website that I encourage you to look at, and it's about fat activism. And finally, something else that is very powerful, that is a direct response to the Virginia campaign I showed you a few moments ago. This is the I Stand campaign. And these are examples where the woman on the left, whose name is Marilyn Wan, she responded and she started this campaign by saying, I stand against harming fat children, hate, and health. Or, sorry, hate does not equal health. And then these others that are, so many, many people on the website have added their own images and statements of claim with regard to their positioning. The one in the middle, of course, is, again, quite spectacular. I stand for turning stereotypes upside down and shaking them loose. And then the two young girls, we stand against teaching kids to hate their bodies. Awesome, doesn't have a side. So even in the midst of, oh, that's interesting. There's an image missing. Okay, even in the midst of some of the, I think, derogative sometimes, and certainly just perhaps naive campaigns, there have been some of those wonderful examples of resistance. But we and the Phi Women team wanted to generate an alternative approach. So what you're supposed to see on the screen, and I'm not sure if you do, is, oh, I guess I had to click it, is this article about, that is a summary of the review we did of health promotion frameworks and whether they considered gender. And I want to say that we started by documenting as back as 1986 with the WHO Ottawa Charter, and then we moved forward to more recent charters, which included the Bangkok Charter, given that we published this work in 2014, or maybe that was even 2011, excuse me. What I wanted to just illustrate is that there were the threads of potential within the health promotion discourse of a more gender-thoughtful, gender-sensitive approach. And here, for example, in the Ottawa Charter is text about how health promotion should apply equally to women and men. And we found this very important and be part of the justification for us for why we should bring this kind of thinking into the mainstream of health promotion. Another very important source of inspiration for our work was the work that came out of the field of HIV/AIDS, particularly the work that was happening in Africa. This is from 2000. This speech that is available online by the woman who was then the president of the International Center for Research on Women, which is based in New York, Geeta Gupta, gave a very powerful presentation, and I have hung on to this presentation for years as a way of reminding myself about the kind of crux of the issue. And I've highlighted in red the text that I think is so important, in which she said, to effectively address the intersection between HIV/AIDS, gender, and sexuality requires that intervention should at the very least not reinforce damaging gender and sexual stereotypes. And I always took that as a call to action, that we in health promotion should not be reinforcing damaging gender and sexual stereotypes. And indeed, no less than Sir Michael Marmot himself, the former chair of the WHO Commission on the Social Determinants of Health, has said that, quote, the differential status of men and women in almost every sector, in almost every society, is perhaps the most pervasive and entrenched inequity. As such, the relation between the sexes represents as pressing a societal issue for health as the social gradient itself, end quote. Despite a statement as profound and powerful as this, I would argue that we have not seen the level of action that a statement like this would encourage. And moving back, circling back to the HIV/AIDS world, we found another continuing source of this dialogue and promotion within the 2014 Melbourne Declaration from that 20th. So the first was the 13th Annual International AIDS Conference. This is the 20th, in which the declaration was made that the promotion of gender equity is essential to HIV responses that truly meet the needs of those affected by those most affected. So all of that became inspirational to what we depicted in the following, in the image you see above. Now this continuum is adapted. It's just an illustration of this notion, but you can see it's a depiction of a continuum of action on gender and health that starts with a notion on the left of gender inequity and on the right of gender equity as outcomes. It notes that there's a continuum of different kinds of interventions, from those that are gender unequal, gender blind, gender sensitive, gender specific, and those that are gender transformative. And along that continuum are those kinds of interventions which may exploit, accommodate, or transform gender inequalities to pursue health goals. So this work, this framework becomes the center of the work that we did on gender transformative health promotion. So examples of gender exploitative, to try to, again, get this crystallized in your mind, these are the kinds of messages that play on or borrow gendered fears that overtly sexualize women or men or treat women or men as homogeneous groups. So again, the commentary on it's hard to be a little girl when you're not one, which makes it very clear that what little girls are supposed to be. An updated version of the smoking is glamorous image, where we have here, again, a presentation of smoking and its effect on appearance, playing on the assumption that what's important to women is their visual presentation. Here's a gender accommodating, which was one which takes into account and assumes that gendered norms are shared, doesn't question or challenge them, and in this case puts the pregnant belly at the center of the image, is somewhat sexualizing because the women are supposedly naked behind those signs, reproduces assumptions about pregnancy as being a time of unrelenting love and joy, which in many cases it is, but it isn't necessarily always, and using that all in the effort to promote FASD prevention. So exploiting these ideas and these assumptions about women's lives for the sake of raising awareness about FASD. And so what does that mean about gender transformative interventions? So we would argue, as does the literature that I've been showing you, that gender transformative health promotion are actions that aim to improve health and gender equity at the same time. So they recognize that health promotion can either improve or maintain or worsen gender inequities. Gender transformative interventions work to overcome the focus on women that's largely been in their reproductive and caregiving roles, trying to give a broader sense of women's and men's lives. They take an intersectional approach, recognizing that women and men are multidimensional and not simply a function of their gender. And they recognize, for example, the role of women and men, and accordingly, men and boys, and accordingly women and men on women's and men's health respectively. So how the gendered assumptions for either affects the health of the other and the actions that we take. So how do we transform gender relations, which is what is at the crux of this? So remember, gender is more than gender identity, which is a very strong topic of conversation these days, but is not the focus of what I'm referring to. I'm talking about gender relations, which are socially structured, which are culturally and historically contingent, and which can vary with time and place, which means they can change. So when we work to transform those relations, we encourage critical awareness of shared understandings of gender roles and norms. We challenge the imbalances of power in distribution of resources, and with that, the allocation of duties and roles between women and men. We engage men and boys in women's empowerment approaches through information sharing, raising interest and support, and or empowerment strategies for those men and boys who are themselves less empowered. Here's a quote from John Olive, which paraphrases what we would have said about the women's health movement 20 years ago. If you work with men, the benefits of them being healthier flow onto the community, to their partners, to women, and to children. We would say the same has been true for women's health, that working together we can improve not only the direct targets of our interventions, but also their families, their children, and the community as a whole. So how do we do that? Well, here are some examples that are more parallel to the examples I've already shared with you. Health promotion can consider men's and women's needs specifically, and then how they intersect with with class, age, ethnicity, so that intersectional approach. Acknowledge and foster different norms and roles for women, but also how they could change their impact on resources. So here's an example, a positive example about alcohol and pregnancy don't mix, but notice that the couple are in this together. So healthy mothers and babies need everyone's support. We see two people who are engaged in a relationship. They are participating in the raising of this, or managing this pregnancy together, and the message is that women can't do it alone and are not solely responsible for FASD prevention on their own. We need to encourage culturally appropriate adaptations and engagement with regard to our intervention messaging. You'll notice the emphasis, of course, is so much on social marketing because it's one of the best ways to depict the kinds of things I'm talking about. Here we see some FASD prevention messages, and I have to thank Nancy Poole for these images. These are taken from organizations across the country. Again, they promote the message that FASD prevention is not something that women are responsible on their own, that it takes a community to support women to have a healthy pregnancy, that friends support friends through pregnancy, etc. So a very, very powerful and quite a different message than the disembodied head with the bottle in her hand. Here's an example from colleagues at the University of British Columbia, the Okanagan campus currently, that have been looking for many years at addressing smoking in pregnancy from a different perspective. This is an example of a handbook they've done on couples and smoking, in which they take, again, a couple's perspective. So not just looking at women and smoking, but looking at women and their partners as a context in which smoking occurs. This particular illustration is of a vignette, and it asks you to go through a quiz to identify the pattern of smoking in your own relationship, and then to understand, if that's how you behave, what does this mean for how you might have to, might work together to change things over the course of a pregnancy in order to, again, have a healthy pregnancy, but also not to be in a position where one partner is controlling the behavior of another. Pregnancy is a time of increased risk for women in many ways, and smoking can become quite literally a flashpoint when one partner determines that the other person's behavior is not acceptable or appropriate. So this is the kind of guide that's trying to deal with that. And just to remind you that these issues are, as much as I come from and work in the field of women's health, that these issues are issues for men as well. There are tobacco control activities that also emphasize men as continuing to be strong and promote the issue of, the famous Marlboro man. Like, that is not a helpful or healthy image for men either. The role of masculinity needs to be challenged and understood in the ways it promotes and fosters some of the trends we see in motor vehicle accidents among teen boys. And here's an example, an illustration. This is about how to promote HIV testing, but it's, again, the idea that testing itself makes you stronger. So it's an empowering message about the strength that comes from knowledge and from taking action to promote one's own health. And then here, this is an illustration to promote, again, work that John Olive has been really engaged in, which comes originally from Australia, but he's translated it here. And this is the notion that men need to build and live in community with men, challenging the stereotype that men don't talk to one another, that they will not care about or share themselves in intimate and personal ways. This is a men's shed, and these have been established in New Zealand, Ireland, Wales, England, Portugal, Finland, Croatia, Uganda, and most recently here in Canada. Some are very traditional, and some are innovative. They are, there's one in Winnipeg, and there's one now in the Okanagan. The shed is both a metaphor and a place. It's a placeholder for how you bring people together so they connect. They can build these spaces together, and they are a place for men to sit and interact and talk, but they can also have project time. So this is a different way of approaching and relating to men, for men to work with each other. So circling right back to where I started, we concluded on the basis of the work that we did over the years that we were together as a team that the answer to our burning question about how to improve health promotion for women was to adjust gender inequities and health simultaneously within our health promotion programs, policy, and research. So our call to action was to think about how health promotion was both, could be both deliberately and assertively committed to and engaged with gender equity as a goal. So we chose to, and we invited Health Promotion Canada and Health Nexus to celebrate with us the launch of our book, but we chose to have this particular topic today because we are currently experiencing and part of the 16 Days of Action on Gender-Based Violence. Now Canada recognizes these same global days from November 25th to December 10th. This is the current campaign against gender-based violence, and this is the definition of gender-based violence that Status of Women Canada here has and is promoting. And notice that gender-based violence includes the use and abuse of power and control over another person. It is perpetuated against someone based on their gender identity, gender expression, or perceived gender. And I think perception is really important in that phrase because it's about assumptions about who people think other people are. Violence against women and girls is one form of gender-based violence, but gender-based violence has a disproportionate impact as well on LGBTQ and other gender non-binary people, including two-spirited people. The hashtag #MyActionsMatter is a call to action that you're invited to go to the website and make a pledge for what you're going to do to recognize how individuals can act. But I really wanted to remind you that we have this special 16-day period in which we join the global community as part of our resistance to gender-based violence. And tragically, in Canada, we have our own celebration, commemorative activity within the midst of this solemn time. And that is a result of the December massacre on December 6th, which happened in Montreal at L'École Polytechnique. And this is the murder of 14 women, and that occurred in 1990. So since 1991, Canada has recognized our own National Day of Remembrance and Action. So here's a photograph of the memorial in Ottawa. There are memorials in many cities throughout the country, and you will find next week that there are local and national actions. So that's why we chose this time for this seminar, or this webinar, excuse me, and I want to acknowledge why I wrote this book chapter, which I hinted at the beginning. This time last year, I was approached by our provincial health Ministry of Health to work with them on improving the health sector response to gender-based violence, and that has meant developing an online course with them. And we're just about finished that, but I'll be honest with you, I am not an expert on gender-based violence. And I was thinking at the same time that I needed to write a chapter for this book. And I knew I would be writing it about gender-transformative health promotion. But I chose to focus it on gender-based violence because it was a way for me to immerse myself in the content and to think long and hard as we developed the proposal for that course and as we worked through it about what the issues were and to develop my own understanding. And it started, of course, with trying to understand the statistics about gender-based violence. Globally, it is well recognized that 1 in 3 women or girls will experience violence at some point in their lifetime. In Canada, we know that half of all women report experiencing physical or sexual violence over the course of their lives. It's estimated that sexual assault and intimate partner violence cost $9 billion per year. But in both of those figures are contestable because it's really challenging to know the rates of intimate partner violence and sexual assault, which are the 2 most common experiences of gender-based violence in Canada. That's because both are underreported, and the mechanisms that we use for getting data One is our police reports, and the other is a self-report survey, the General Social Survey. And though the data from those two don't match, not surprisingly, given the stigmatized nature and the very personal and intimate nature of these crimes, many people do not come forward and report to police, and many people never talk about their experiences at all. So the assumption is that these, as high as these estimates are, that they likely do not reflect exactly what's actually happening in our society. We do know from recording in our shelters that more than 3,000 women stay in a shelter on any given night in Canada. We also know that women are 11 times more likely to be the victims of sexual offenses than men, and that young women, and that's between 15 and 24, are those most at risk. And disturbingly, we know that there is an unknown number of Indigenous women and girls who have been missing and murdered. I say unknown because we have varying estimates again. One number that's thrown around is 668. I know that that is not going to be the precise figure, and that one of the reasons for our current national inquiry is to try to grapple with the scale of this phenomenon. According to the Native Women's Association of Canada, 2 to 3 Aboriginal women are reported missing or murdered per month, and it's suspected that all the numbers are again unreported. So we need to be mindful that when we talk about gender-based violence in Canada, particularly sexual assault and physical violence, and intimate partner violence, that we don't really know entirely what the scale of the phenomenon we're grappling with. So if we're going to talk about preventing gender-based violence, and it's the scale of the phenomenon that it is, then I would like to suggest that we think about how this gender-transformative approach might help. And that would involve understanding the underlying gender relations that maintain and exacerbate gender-based violence. It means that we need to think about where and how we promote gender equality and women's empowerment. Ask ourselves and involve men and boys in learning to engage with women and girls in respectful, health-promoting ways. We need to go beyond the kinds of slogans that are catchy and memorable but are not functional necessarily to skills development, how to interact and engage in respectful ways. And particularly given some of the gendered and intersecting ways in which these forms of violence affect us, we need to embrace trauma-informed, culturally safe harm reduction approaches. I'll try to make that clear as we go along. So here's an example of a campaign that is a partnership between, it started with the BC Lions. This is our provincial football team. It's a partnership with the Ending Violence Association of BC. And if you go on their website, you will see that the Be More Than a Bystander campaign involves members of the football team, the players, the managers, the coaches, going to speak to teens about respectful interactions and relationship with girls and women. And so it's men modeling healthy relationships and taking it seriously for younger men. This is the Moosehide Campaign, which was also started here in BC, specifically in Victoria. It has an annual fasting campaign. This is the announcement for the gathering that will be coming up in February 15th. It's a grassroots movement of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous men who, again, are standing up together against violence against women. It's called the Moosehide Campaign because they wear this tag to signify that they are a member of the campaign. And you can see that this is a march of men who are choosing to be recognized and to honor the women and children in their lives. Those were two examples here in Canada, specifically in British Columbia. These initiatives have also been a central part of some of the HIV work. Here's an example from Tanzania. This is a program called SASA, which is an acronym for Start, Awareness, Support, and Action. And this comes from UC San Diego, where they have a remarkable gender equity and health initiative. And they use, again, this gender-transformative approach to raise awareness around healthy relationships, healthy sexuality, and reduction of behaviors that are not safe for women and men, in this case in Africa. Recognizing, for example, that some of women's exposure to HIV results from gender-based violence. Now, it's impossible to be having the conversation we're having today without acknowledging the current situation. So these are just examples that many of you will have way more of them, but I refer to this as ripped from the headlines. We have this very public conversation underway, especially but not exclusively in North America. We have the famous trial here in Canada of Jian Ghomeshi. We have the accusations against people like Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby. We have the remarks made by the judge Robin Camp about how a sexual assault victim should have kept her knees together. And we have the continuing exposing of allegations against powerful male figures, a few women, but primarily, almost uniformly, powerful men. Now, one response to this that, again, is very familiar, I think, to many of you has been the #MeToo campaign. I don't know how many of you are aware that this campaign was actually started by Tarana Burke a few years ago in 2006, and she was trying to draw attention to the fact that women and girls of color have particularly experienced sexual violence and needed their own mechanism for expression and recognition. And so she started this campaign, which has been, as you know, gone global and viral. And just a few weeks ago, the UN Women, so this would be the executive director of UN Women, gave a very powerful and important speech in which she talked about the role of men in addressing gender-based violence, and talked about how men should not be quiet spectators, but rather participate in transforming the culture and the norms for that contribute to and underlie gender-based violence. So in the midst of all of these revelations and allegations, I'd like to have a bit of a conversation for a few minutes with you about what this means for health promotion and the kinds of work that we do. I know that not all of us work specifically on the issue of gender-based violence, but in our daily lives and in our work lives, I think it's pretty unescapable right now that this kind of conversation is happening. So in the midst of our 16 days of action, it seemed important to pause and think about this. So I'm curious about what you think a social media campaign like the #MeToo can do. Whether this campaign is relevant and appropriate for low and middle income countries. What does this kind of conversation say about what kind of gender transformative activities we might need to engage in? Does this apply to gender minorities? Is the campaign and discussion too heteronormative? Is everyone benefiting from the current approach? We know that Ms. Burke was promoting that campaign starting in 2006 for women and girls of color. Has that been sustained? Are you seeing that reflected in the conversation that's happening in our media? And what does this all have to do with the ways in which we might respond to gender-based violence? So I guess my last question is, are we reaching a tipping point? Like, this seems to be the question of the year. And do you expect to see fundamental change in the conditions that have created, sustained, and contribute to gender-based violence? Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That was really interesting. And I have lots of questions, but I'm going to actually wait and see if any of the actual participants have questions first. There's someone typing in the chat box. So go ahead and type your questions in the chat box if that's what you prefer, or up at the top of your screen where it says meetings, layouts, pods, audio, or something along those lines. You'll see a little, it's a gender neutral, not a gender inclusive figure there, I think. And if you click on that, you'll be able to raise your hand, and then we'll call you to speak on the phone. Let's give people a minute to think. That was a lot of information to take on.
I know.
Okay, somebody's typing. Okay, and Jeff Connors has commented that it would be good to see men as a population targeted more, as they too often are the perpetrator but also the victim of violence. 70% of missing and murdered Indigenous women in that time were men. I'm not sure I understand that comment, Jeff, if you want to clarify on the phone line or in the chat box.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Jeff, are you saying that there was a proportionate number of Indigenous men? 70%? But it's fair to say, I mean, I would make the caveat that my everyday job is that I work in women's health, so my emphasis has been on promoting and addressing health for women. That said, I believe that there are gender norms and biases that are destructive for men and boys, and that recognizing, limiting bias stereotypes is damaging for everyone. So yes, 70% of Indigenous folks missing and murdered in the time were men. So you mean over the same time period? Yeah, I agree. There is certain forms of violence is primarily a men's issue. I think the important point, Jeff, if I could make it, is just simply that the patterns of violence that women and men experience are different. Men are more likely to experience forms of violence, what we call, violence from strangers, than women. Women are more likely to experience violence from people in their intimate environments, people that are known to them. So that those different profiles mean that the actions that need to be taken also need to be different. Yeah, thank you very much.
Much people typing here.
Yeah, and sorry.
Okay. A couple of people are typing. We'll wait for them to finish. Or you can use the raise hand thing and speak on the phone if you prefer. Some groups are more phone-oriented and some are more chat box-oriented. I think we've got a chat box group here, so that's fine. Oh, a bunch of people are typing again. Just hit return when you're done, it'll pop up. Yeah, yep. You have to hit return before it pops up. I should probably mention that. You can see when people are in the box, but not then. Okay. Well, I can ask one of my questions if somebody doesn't hit return very soon. Actually, maybe I will just in the meantime. I'm curious what you think about the whole sort of backlash thing that's going on with all of this attention in the media to sort of gendered violence and how you see that affecting whether it's a tipping point or not. I always think that, by the time we get a backlash, we're preaching past the choir and we're getting somewhere. But what do you think about that?
Do you want to give an example of the backlash that you're thinking of, Robin?
Oh, sort of the rise of sort of neo-Nazism and that urge for control that we're seeing certainly in the States and that kind of thing.
Right, wow. Of course, I was thinking at a much more intimate, personal, household level most of the time when I was thinking about this, but I think that this is a very contested time, and I think that whether it's been made explicit or not, sorry, I have a colleague here who just needs a hand for a second. There you go. I'll get the door. Okay. Sorry, I am at work, so there's people in the room. I think that there are dimensions of gender within the underlying tension and issues that you're describing, and that that makes the issues sometimes explosive, like really very powerful and concerning. So I haven't thought about that issue long enough. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm just fumbling around thinking about it.
Oh, well, yeah. It's one that I find interesting. Now we have a bunch of things in the chat box, so there we go.
So I'm going to Allison's just because it came up first. So all of these programs that I've talked about involve really men having their awareness and understanding raised, and then they in turn talking to younger men. So it's really about role modeling and creating counter images to what is sometimes depicted in our media, television, etc. Men speaking out and saying what's acceptable and not, and creating an alternative social reality for younger men. And just Deborah made a comment. I think it's best an upstream approach to gender-based violence to build on social norms and standards for men and communities to stand against GBV, build resilient individuals, families, and communities. The hashtag MeToo is great, but unfortunate that it's lost its focus on race. I agree. I like the hashtag Be Better campaign. Yep, calling on everyone to take a stand. Yeah, I think the challenge that I have with these campaigns is only that you can feel like you've done something in 20 seconds, and you may or may not have worked on fundamental change. It's also that I think that they're not open to all people equally. There's certainly concern that there was a wonderful article in the Globe and Mail just the other day about how, given the personal risks that many visible minority women and girls experience, that the revealing themselves through a campaign like MeToo, hashtag MeToo, is just not as safe as it might be for more prominent and powerful women, which can again distort our understanding of what is going on and who is affected by gender-based violence. And so it goes back to that. It may help us illuminate, but also not give us a complete picture. I know you can all read all the comments. So,
Sarah had a question about best practices.
Love to see more and learn more about that program. Yeah, Deborah, your comment that it takes famous people coming forward to draw attention speaks loudly to the issue. I agree. I also think it's fascinating the certain sort of escalation we've seen very recently will. Yeah, it's just so hard to know. Like you know about history retrospectively. Yep, Me Too campaign is meant to be inclusive. Yep.
Okay,
That's
we've got about comment. 2 minutes. Yeah,
yep.
They're terrific comments. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, fantastic. And Irv, you want to say?
Yeah, I was going to say we're at 1:58, so yes, Irv, you can certainly make a concluding comment, and now would be a good time to do that, so go ahead. You may have to unmute yourself again.
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted, right? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, well, first of all, I really want to thank you, Anne, for an outstanding presentation. I also want to thank Robin for organizing this webinar, and Health Nexus and Health Promotion Canada for sponsoring it. In concluding, I'd like to note that this is the first webinar based on the book. The book actually has 24 chapters and an afterword, and so there are other chapters that might be worthy of webinars. So I would ask everyone on this call to let us know if you found this webinar interesting and useful, and if you think that we should co-sponsor a series based on other chapters in the 4th edition of Health Promotion in Canada. And thank you all for participating.
Yes, I will add my thank you as well. Thank you so much, Anne, for a fascinating presentation. And I will add that question, Irv, to the evaluation form, which I will send around. We are at 2 o'clock now. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you to all my co-presenters and Health Promotion Canada and Barb for showing up to make comments, and Irv for having the idea to have the webinar. It's been terrific, and I'm going to close it down now. Thank you, everybody.
Robin, can I just ask, will you keep track of the chat as well as the audio?
Yes.
Okay, perfect, because I think Debbie's comments are in particular are fantastic, and I'd love a record of them.
Yes, I can send that to you if you like.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your time today, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks all. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
The leader has disconnected. The conference will be terminated in 5 minutes.